The order is given at 3:14 inches the morning. Not from a hardened bunker beneath Tehran, not from a command center visible on any Western satellite image. From a series of encrypted communications relayed through a network of mobile relay stations scattered across 3 provinces, each one active for less than 90 seconds before going dark and passing the signal to the next node in the chain. By the time Western signals intelligence assets have triangulated the origin of the transmission, the men who sent it are already in different vehicles moving in different directions, and the order itself is already being executed 2,000 kilometers away. In the Alborz Mountains, in the desert plateau east of Isfahan, in 3 separate deployment zones in the Zagros range. 96 mobile transporter erector launchers, each one carrying a single Sejjil-2 ballistic missile, begin their final positioning sequence simultaneously. The drivers have known for 72 hours that this moment was coming. The technical crews have been conducting pre-launch checks in rotating shifts for the past 36 hours, keeping the systems at the highest state of readiness without the thermal signature of active fueling that would alert overhead surveillance. The Sejjil-2 does not need fueling. It never did. It is solid fueled. It has been ready to launch since the moment it left the production facility. 96 launchers, 300 missiles. The first salvo is away within 4 minutes of the order. In Tel Aviv, at the sprawling campus of the Israeli Air Force headquarters at the Kirya military complex, the nerve center of Israeli air power, the place where every sortie is authorized, every air defense engagement is commanded, every targeting decision for the most powerful air force in the Middle East is processed and executed. The first warning comes from the long-range radar network in the Negev. Ballistic missile launch. Multiple. Tracking. The duty officer reaches for the alert protocol. The intercept systems begin spinning up. Arrow. 3 batteries across the country receive the threat data and begin computing engagement solutions. They have 11 minutes. It is not enough. The first wave of Sejjil-2 missiles moving at Mach 14 through the upper atmosphere, each one carrying a 750 kilogram warhead on a trajectory calculated to deliver it to within meters of its designated aim. Point begins its terminal descent. Arrow 3 engages. Some intercepts succeed. Many do not. The second wave arrives before the first engagement sequence is complete. Then the third, 300 missiles, arriving in overlapping waves, each wave compressing the time available for the next intercept sequence. Each failed intercept adding 1 more warhead to the count of threats proceeding uncontested toward the Kirya complex. The Israeli Air Force headquarters, the building from which every Israeli air operation for the past 4 decades has been planned, authorized, and commanded, is struck by 14 separate warhead impacts in a period of less than 3 minutes. The command network goes dark. Tel Aviv's military command infrastructure, the integrated system of radar feeds, communications, links, targeting pipelines, and command authority chains that constitutes the operational brain of the Israeli Defense Forces, ceases to function as a coherent entity. And in the E-ring of the Pentagon, where the senior leadership of the United States military is assembled in the National Military Command Center, the screens are showing a picture that no American strategic planner has ever seen in a live operational context. The Israeli Air Force has just lost its headquarters, and 300 Iranian ballistic missiles did it in 11 minutes. Welcome to the Jiang Report. I am Professor Jiang Shueqin. Today we examine how Iran's Sejjil-2 ballistic missile, 300 of them, launched in coordinated waves, could systematically annihilate the Israeli Air Force headquarters, destroy Tel Aviv's military command infrastructure, and trigger a crisis in Washington that reshapes the strategic balance of the Middle East for a generation. Here is what we are covering today. First, the operational logic of attacking the Israeli Air Force headquarters specifically. Why this target above all others? Because Israeli air power is the single most important military capability in the entire theater. It is the capability that Israel depends on for deterrence, for offensive operations against Iran and its proxies, and for the suppression of the missile threat that Iran has spent decades developing. Destroy the command infrastructure of that air power, and you do not merely damage the Israeli military, you lobotomize it. Second, the Sejjil-2 inches detail, Iran's most capable solid-fueled ballistic missile, 2,500 kilometers of range, Mach 14 terminal velocity, a guidance system that has been refined over 20 years of continuous development. We will examine every critical technical characteristic of this weapon and explain why it is uniquely suited to the kind of coordinated mass strike we are analyzing today. Third, the wave attack doctrine. 300 missiles do not arrive simultaneously. They arrive in carefully sequenced waves designed to defeat Israeli missile defense through a combination of volume, timing, and trajectory variation. We will examine the operational logic of this doctrine and explain precisely how it defeats Arrow, 3 David Sling, and the Patriot batteries that constitute Israel's layered defense architecture. And fourth, the consequences. What does Israeli military capability look like when its Air Force headquarters is gone? How does the United States respond to the sudden degradation of its most capable regional ally? And what does this strike mean for the broader strategic order in the Middle East and beyond? Stay with me. This analysis goes deep. If you are new to the Jang Report, welcome. This channel exists because the analysis of military conflict that is available through mainstream Western media is with very few exceptions inadequate. It covers the surface of events without examining the systems beneath them. It tells you what happened without explaining the technical and strategic logic that made it possible. And it operates within institutional constraints, political, commercial, diplomatic, that prevent it from saying certain things even when those things are analytically correct and strategically important. We have no such constraints here. We follow the technical evidence. We follow the strategic logic. We present the conclusions honestly even when they are uncomfortable for the governments and institutions that Western audiences have been conditioned to trust. If that approach serves your effort to understand what is actually happening in the world, subscribe, hit the bell. Share this analysis with the people in your network who are trying to make sense of the Middle East beyond the level of headlines, and leave your assessment in the comments. The community that engages with this channel produces some of the most substantive military analysis available anywhere on this platform. Now to the analysis. To understand why the Israeli Air Force headquarters is the single highest value target in the entire Israeli military target set, you need to understand what Israeli air power actually means in the context of the Iran-Israel confrontation. Israel is a small country. Its strategic depth, the geographic buffer between its borders and its most critical population centers, is measured in tens of kilometers, not hundreds. It cannot absorb a ground invasion the way a larger country can. It cannot trade space for time in the way that Russian military doctrine, for instance, contemplates. Israel's security depends at a fundamental level on its ability to project military power outward to strike threats before they reach Israeli territory, to suppress adversary capabilities before they can be employed, and to maintain such a decisive qualitative advantage over any potential adversary that the cost of attacking Israel is simply too high to contemplate. The Israeli Air Force is the primary instrument of that outward power projection. The F-35 Ayadir fleet, the F-15 IRAM fleet, the sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities, the precision munitions inventory, the tanker fleet that provides the aerial refueling capacity for long-range strike missions. All of this capability is coordinated, commanded, and directed from a single integrated command infrastructure, and the nerve center of that infrastructure is the Air Force headquarters at the Kirya complex in Tel Aviv. The Kirya is not just an office building. It is the operational brain of Israeli air power. It houses the Combined Air Operations Center, the CAOC, where real-time air operations are managed across every mission simultaneously. It houses the Targeting Intelligence Fusion Center, where signals intelligence, human intelligence, and overhead imagery are integrated into the targeting packages that F-35 pilots receive before every strike mission. It houses the Air Defense Coordination Center, where the engagement authorities for Iron Dome David Sling Arrow 3 and Patriot batteries across the country are managed and deconflicted to prevent fratricide during multi-layer intercept engagement. Destroy the Kirya Air Force headquarters and you do not merely kill the people inside it. You sever every one of those command functions simultaneously. You leave the F-35 fleet without mission tasking. You leave the targeting intelligence pipeline without a processing center. You leave the air defense batteries without coordinated engagement authority, each battery reverting to autonomous local engagement protocols that are significantly less effective than the integrated national picture that the Kirya provides. Iranian operational planners understand this with precise clarity. The Kirya Air Force Headquarters is not just a high-value target. It is the target, the single node whose destruction produces the maximum degradation of Israeli military capability per warhead expended. Now let us examine the operational scenario in detail. The 300 missile salvo is not fired simultaneously from a single launch area. It is fired in coordinated sequences from multiple dispersed launch zones across western Iran, timed to produce a specific pattern of arrivals over the target area that is designed to defeat the Israeli layered defense architecture. The first wave, approximately 80 missiles, is fired from launch positions in the Zagros mountain range on trajectories calculated to arrive over Israeli territory from the east. These missiles serve a dual purpose. Their primary function is to trigger the full activation of Israeli air defense systems to force Arrow 3 batteries to commit intercept rounds and begin depleting their magazines. Their secondary function is to provide real-time data on the performance of Israeli intercept systems through the electronic intelligence collection assets that Iran has positioned to observe the engagement. The second wave, approximately 120 missiles, is fired from launch positions in the Alborz range north of Tehran on trajectories that approach Israeli territory from a different azimuth than the first wave. The timing is calculated so that the second wave arrives while the Arrow 3 batteries are in various stages of reload and re-engagement following the first wave engagement. The combination of depleted magazines, interrupted reload sequences, and the cognitive and computational load of tracking a new wave from a different direction simultaneously degrades the intercept effectiveness of every battery in the engagement zone. The third wave 80 missiles arrives from launch positions east of Isfahan, timed to impact while the defense is most degraded from the first 2 engagements. By this point in the engagement sequence, multiple Arrow 3 batteries have exhausted their ready magazines. David Sling batteries have committed a significant portion of their stunner interceptor inventory. Patriot Pack 3 batteries, which operate at lower altitude and shorter range, are facing a volume of Leakers missiles that have penetrated the upper layers of the defense that exceeds their engagement capacity. The geometry of the 3-wave attack also defeats the physical limitations of the engagement radar systems. Each Arrow 3 battery has a finite radar field of view. It can track and engage threats within a specific angular volume of sky. Threats approaching simultaneously from different azimuths force the engagement radar to partition its tracking capacity across multiple sectors. Reducing the number of intercept solutions it can compute simultaneously for threats in any single sector. The result of the 3-wave architecture is that the Israeli Air Force Headquarters, a hardened facility that a single missile could not reliably destroy, is struck by multiple warheads from multiple directions within a 3-minute window. The hardening that was designed to protect it against a single impact is overwhelmed by the cumulative effect of successive impacts on the same structural elements. The command network goes dark, not partially, completely. The Sejjil-2 is Iran's most capable operational ballistic missile, and it has received less analytical attention in Western defense literature than its capabilities warrant. The name Sejjil derives from the Arabic word for baked clay, a reference to the stones that in Islamic tradition were used to destroy the army of Abraha. The naming is deliberate. It is a statement of intent encoded in nomenclature, and the weapon itself is fully consistent with that statement. The Sejjil-2 is a 2-stage solid-fueled ballistic missile with a maximum range of approximately 2,500 kilometers. This range figure is significant because it places every significant target in Israel, and for that matter, every significant target in the broader Middle East, including U.S. bases in the Gulf, in Turkey, and in the Horn of Africa within reach, from launch positions deep inside Iranian territory. The missile does not need to be forward deployed to threaten any of these targets. It can be launched from the most survivable and well-protected areas of the Iranian interior and still reach its target. The 2-stage solid fuel propulsion system is the defining operational characteristic that distinguishes the Sejjil-2 from the liquid-fueled systems that dominated Iran's earlier ballistic missile inventory. Both stages use solid propellant motors, the first stage providing the boost phase acceleration that carries the missile out of the atmosphere, the second stage providing the sustained thrust needed to reach the trajectory apogee that determines the missile's range and terminal velocity. Iranian solid propellant technology has advanced substantially since the Sejjil program began in the early 2000s. The specific impulse, the measure of propellant efficiency of Iranian solid motors, has increased through iterative refinement of the propellant formulation, the nozzle geometry, and the combustion chamber design. The current generation of Iranian solid propellant achieves performance parameters that are competitive with the solid motors used in comparable systems operated by more technologically advanced states. The terminal velocity of the Sejjil-2 assessed at approximately Mach 14 inches. The terminal phase is a direct product of the energy imparted by the two-stage propulsion system and the gravitational acceleration during descent from apogee. At Mach 14, the warhead is traveling at approximately 4,760 meters per second. The kinetic energy of the warhead at this velocity, independent of the explosive charge it carries, is sufficient to cause catastrophic structural damage to any non-hardened target through impact alone. The guidance system of the Sejjil-2 has been progressively upgraded through multiple iterations of the program, and the current configuration reflects lessons learned from over 2 decades of Iranian ballistic missile development experience. The primary navigation system is a ring laser gyroscope inertial navigation system, a significant advance over the older mechanical gyroscope systems used in earlier Iranian missiles. Ring laser gyroscopes have no moving parts, which makes them more reliable and more precise than mechanical systems, particularly under the extreme vibration and acceleration loads of ballistic missile flight. The precision of the ring laser gyroscope INS means that the Sejjil-2 accumulates significantly less navigation error over the course of its flight than its predecessors. The INS is supplemented by a satellite navigation receiver that processes signals from multiple constellations, GPS, GLONASS, and Beidou, providing continuous position updates throughout the flight that correct for any accumulated INS drift. The multi-constellation architecture provides redundancy against single constellation jamming. To deny the Sejjil-2 its satellite navigation update, an adversary would need to jam all 3 constellations simultaneously over the missile's flight path, a technically demanding and resource-intensive electronic warfare task. In the terminal phase, the Sejjil-2 employs a scene-matching guidance mode that uses preloaded electro-optical imagery of the target to make final course corrections. This terminal guidance capability is what produces the missile's assessed circular error, probable of approximately 30 meters, a figure that represents a substantial improvement over the 190-meter CEP of the earlier Shahab-3, and is sufficient for reliable engagement of large fixed facilities like the Kirya complex. 30 meters CEP against a target complex that spans hundreds of meters means that every Sejjil-2 warhead that survives the intercept engagement will impact within a 30-meter radius of its designated aim point. Against a target like the Israeli Air Force headquarters with its multiple hardened structures, its underground command facilities, its antenna farms, and communications nodes, the ability to designate specific aim points within the complex and reliably hit them transforms the Sejjil-2 from an area weapon into a precision instrument. The warhead configuration of the Sejjil-2 includes both a unitary high-explosive blast fragmentation warhead and a penetrating warhead variant. The penetrating warhead, a dense steel body containing a delayed fuse explosive charge, is specifically designed to defeat the reinforced concrete construction used in military-hardened facilities. Upon impact, the steel body punches through the outer layers of the structure before the delayed fuse triggers the explosive charge, delivering the blast effect to the interior of the facility rather than against its hardened exterior surface. Against the underground command facilities that form the most critical components of the Kirya Air Force headquarters, the penetrating warhead is the relevant configuration. The above-ground structures of the Kirya are hardened to a degree appropriate for a national military headquarters, but they are not hardened to the standard of a dedicated nuclear survivable bunker. A penetrating 750 kilogram warhead impacting within 30 meters of a designated aim point, will reliably defeat the hardening of any above-ground military headquarters structure. The electronic warfare resistance of the Sejjil-2 is the final technical characteristic that closes the loop on the defensive picture. Israel's electronic warfare capability is among the most sophisticated in the world. The Unit 8200, Israel's Signals Intelligence and Electronic Warfare Organization, has developed jamming techniques and spoofing systems that have been effective against earlier generations of Iranian guidance systems. The Sejjil-2's multi-constellation, satellite navigation, and passive scene-matching terminal guidance architecture are specifically designed to be resistant to these techniques. The scene-matching terminal guidance system in particular operates entirely passively. It emits no signal, it receives no signal that can be jammed. It simply compares images, the stored reference image of the target, against the real-time sensor image of the terrain below. No electronic warfare technique currently available to Israel or the United States can defeat a passive optical guidance system operating on stored imagery. The only way to defeat scene-matching guidance is to change the physical appearance of the target so that the missile cannot recognize it, an approach that is operationally impractical for a facility the size of the Kirya complex. 300 Sejjil-2 missiles, 30 meters CEP, penetrating warheads, passive terminal guidance, arriving in 3 coordinated waves designed to saturate and exhaust the Israeli layered defense architecture. The Israeli Air Force headquarters does not survive this engagement. The question is not whether it will be destroyed. The question is how much of the surrounding command infrastructure is destroyed with it. The American response to the destruction of the Israeli Air Force headquarters would be immediate, intense, and beneath the surface of its visible activity, deeply uncertain. The first and most important thing to understand about the American response is what it is actually responding to. This is not a terrorist attack. This is not a border skirmish. This is not the kind of limited military action that can be managed through diplomatic channels and back-channel communications. This is the systematic destruction by precision ballistic missile strike of the headquarters of the Air Force of America's most important regional ally. It is the most significant direct military attack on Israeli military infrastructure since the founding of the state. The institutional pressure on the American government to respond with overwhelming force would be immense and immediate. Congressional leaders of both parties would be demanding military action within hours. The Israeli government, or whatever portion of the Israeli government retained functional command capacity in the immediate aftermath of the strike, would be demanding American military support with an urgency that would be difficult to refuse publicly. But the military options available to the United States are significantly constrained by a set of operational realities that the visible panic response tends to obscure. The first constraint is basing. A serious American military strike against Iranian missile infrastructure, the kind of strike that would actually degrade Iran's ability to conduct further, Sejjil-2 attacks would require access to air bases close enough to Iran to allow strike aircraft to reach targets deep in the Iranian interior with sufficient payload and loiter time to conduct effective strikes. The available basing options in the region in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, in Qatar, in Turkey are all subject to host nation approval, and every one of those host nations would be conducting an extremely careful calculation in the hours after the Sejjil-2 strike, weighing the consequences of providing basing support against the consequences of Iranian retaliation against their own territory. Iran has made the calculation of that risk very explicit through its years of investment in precision strike capability. Any Gulf state that provides basing for American strikes against Iran can expect to be the next target of exactly the kind of precision ballistic missile attack that just destroyed the Israeli Air Force headquarters. That threat is credible in a way that it was not 5 years ago. And its credibility would weigh heavily on the decision-making of every Gulf capital in the hours after the Kirya strike. The second constraint is intelligence. A successful American strike against Iranian missile forces requires knowing where those forces are. The mobile TEL-based deployment of the Sejjil-2 96 launchers dispersed across 3 mountain ranges, each one repositioning immediately after launch, presents exactly the kind of target that American intelligence has historically struggled to find and fix in sufficient time to act on. The 48 hours after a large Iranian ballistic missile strike are precisely the period when Iranian TEL dispersal is at its maximum, and when the overhead intelligence picture is most degraded by the operational security measures that Iranian forces have developed specifically for this scenario. The third constraint is escalation management. Any American military strike against Iranian territory triggers the question of what Iran does next. Iran has additional Sejjil-2 missiles. It has Fatah-2 missile. It has the full range of proxy forces across the region. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, various Iraqi militia groups whose activation would open additional military fronts simultaneously. The American military can handle Iran. It cannot simultaneously handle Iran and activated Hezbollah Houthi attacks on Gulf shipping and militia attacks on American bases in Iraq and Syria without a level of military mobilization that has domestic political consequences of its own. The geopolitical response from non-American actors would compound the American strategic problem. Russia and China would move immediately to exploit the crisis. Russian diplomatic channels would be working to prevent any Security Council authorization for military action against Iran. Chinese economic and diplomatic support for Tehran would be signaled through carefully calibrated public statements. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization would issue a statement calling for restraint that would be heard in every Gulf capital as a signal that the Russian-Chinese bloc supports Iranian resistance to American pressure. The result is an American government that is simultaneously under maximum domestic pressure to act decisively, facing maximum operational constraints on what decisive action actually looks like, and operating in a geopolitical environment that provides minimum support for the kind of coalition action that American military doctrine prefers. That combination does not produce decisive action. It produces exactly the kind of visible, intense, ultimately inconclusive response that constitutes strategic panic at the national level. There is a human dimension to the destruction of the Israeli Air Force headquarters that goes beyond the tactical and strategic analysis, and it is important enough to examine directly. The Israeli Air Force is not just a military organization. It is a national institution with a symbolic importance that is difficult to overstate for Israeli society. The pilots of the IAF are among the most celebrated figures in Israeli public life. The Air Force's historical achievements, the destruction of Arab air forces in the opening hours of the 1967 war, the Entebbe raid, the destruction of Iraq's Osirak nuclear reactor, the strikes on Syria's Al-Kabar facility. These are not just military history, they are the foundation stories of Israeli national confidence. They are the evidence that a small country surrounded by adversaries can survive and prevail through superior capability and audacity. The Kirya headquarters is the physical embodiment of that institutional identity. It is where the decisions that produced those historical achievements were made. It is where the people who carry the institutional culture of the IAF work every day. And when it is destroyed by Iranian ballistic missiles, when the most capable air force in the Middle East has its command center obliterated by a weapon that its own missile defense system could not reliably stop, the psychological impact on Israeli society extends far beyond the immediate military consequences. It is a challenge to the foundational narrative of Israeli military invincibility. That narrative has absorbed challenges before. The 1973 Yom Kippur War, when Egyptian and Syrian forces achieved complete tactical surprise and inflicted severe early losses on the IDF, was the most severe previous challenge to Israeli military confidence. The nation recovered, the military adapted, the doctrinal lessons were absorbed, and the institutional culture was strengthened by the experience of surviving a near-catastrophic failure. But the 1973 war was ultimately reversed by Israeli military performance in the field. The IDF recovered its tactical dominance within days and turned the strategic situation around. The recovery was possible because the command infrastructure remained intact. The Air Force headquarters was not destroyed. The ability to coordinate, command and direct military power survived the initial shock. The Sejjil-2 strike scenario removes that possibility of recovery. When the command infrastructure is gone, the recovery is not a matter of days. It is a matter of months the time required to reconstitute a functioning integrated air operations center, to rebuild the targeting intelligence pipeline, to restore the air defense coordination architecture that requires years of institutional development and cannot be replaced by improvisation. For Iran, the psychological dynamic is the inverse of this. The successful execution of a 300-missile coordinated strike that destroyed the headquarters of the most powerful air force in the Middle East is not just a military victory. It is a civilizational statement. It is Iran saying to the United States, to Israel, to every government in the world that has been calculating its position based on assumptions about the permanence of Israeli military dominance, that those assumptions are no longer valid. The will to continue the resistance, the confidence that the strategic investment has produced real capability, the institutional pride of a military establishment that has spent decades being told it cannot compete with Western-supplied adversaries and has just demonstrated that it can. These are the intangible assets that the Sejjil-2 strike generates for the Iranian side of the equation, and they are strategic assets as real and as durable as any physical weapon system. Step back from the immediate crisis and consider what the annihilation of the Israeli Air Force headquarters by 300 Iranian Sejjil-2 missiles means for the global strategic order. The most immediate and most far-reaching consequence is the demonstration that a regional power, a country under decades of sanctions, international isolation, and constant military pressure can develop and deploy a precision ballistic missile capability sufficient to destroy the military headquarters of a technologically advanced adversary backed by the most powerful military alliance in history. That demonstration breaks something fundamental in the global security architecture that has existed since the end of the Cold War. The architecture of American-led security guarantees the system in which American allies around the world can rely on American military backing to deter adversaries who might otherwise challenge them depends on the credibility of deterrent. And the credibility of the deterrent depends on the demonstrated capability of the guaranteed party to defend itself with American support against realistic threats. If Iran can destroy the Israeli Air Force headquarters despite American support, the deterrent has failed, not partially, demonstrably. And the consequences of that demonstrated failure extend to every other security relationship in the American alliance system, to Taiwan, to South Korea, to the Baltic states, to every country that has structured its security planning around the assumption that American backing makes it safe from the kind of catastrophic military strikes that used to be the exclusive province of great power conflict. The second global consequence is the restructuring of the Middle Eastern security order. The states of the Arab world, which have spent the past decade carefully navigating between American alignment and accommodation with the new Iranian strategic reality, would be forced by the events of this scenario to make choices that they have successfully deferred through studied ambiguity. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 economic transformation program depends on regional stability. The UAE's position as a global, financial, and commercial hub depends on its ability to maintain relationships with all major regional powers. Qatar's role as a diplomatic intermediary depends on its neutrality. All of these carefully constructed positions become untenable in a regional environment where Iran has just demonstrated that it can destroy the headquarters of any military establishment in the region at will. The accommodation with Iran that these states would be driven toward the acknowledgement of Iranian regional primacy that the destruction of the Israeli Air Force headquarters would make strategically unavoidable would effectively end American-led regional security architecture that has been the foundation of U.S. Middle East policy since the 1970s. The military bases would become politically untenable. The security agreements would become strategically irrelevant. The regional order that American diplomacy and military power have spent 50 years constructing would begin to dissolve. The third global consequence is the acceleration of ballistic missile proliferation. Every state actor that has been deterred from developing serious ballistic missile capability by sanctions, pressure, by diplomatic cost, by the assumption that such capabilities could not defeat Western-supplied air defense systems, would revise that assessment in light of the Sejjil-2 demonstration, the specific technical lessons of the three-wave saturation attack, the importance of solid fuel propulsion for rapid launch, the effectiveness of multi-constellation satellite navigation against jamming, the decisive role of coordinated mass salvo in exhausting magazine-limited intercept systems would be studied by every military establishment on Earth. The states that draw the most immediate lessons are the ones with the most immediate incentives to develop comparable capabilities. North Korea, which already possesses relevant technology and would accelerate its export programs. Pakistan, which faces a complex deterrence relationship with India, in which precision ballistic missile capability offers significant advantages, and a range of non-state actors whose state sponsors would be newly motivated to provide them with more capable weapons. The world that exists on the other side of this scenario is a world in which the barriers to precision ballistic missile attack on hardened military targets are permanently lower than they were before. It is a world in which the military headquarters of any country, including countries that have never previously faced realistic threats from this class of weapon, is potentially vulnerable to the kind of coordinated precision strike just destroyed the Israeli Air Force. That is not a marginal change to the global security environment. It is a transformation of it. Let me conclude. Everything we have analyzed today is grounded in documented reality. The Sejjil-2 is a real weapon with the specifications we have described. Two-stage solid fuel, 2500 kilometer range, Mach 14, terminal velocity, precision guidance, 30 meter, CEP. The Israeli Air Force headquarters at the Kirya complex is a real facility whose location and function are matters of public record. The limitations of the Arrow 3 intercept system against high-speed maneuvering threats are acknowledged in the technical literature and in background statements by Israeli defense officials. The three-wave saturation doctrine is not something I invented for this video. It is the logical operational expression of Iranian ballistic missile development doctrine, a doctrine that has been refined over 20 years of study of American and Israeli air defense architecture with the specific objective of identifying and exploiting the mathematical and physical limitations of magazine-limited intercept systems. What I have done in this analysis is trace the logical consequences of combining these real elements, the weapon, the target, the doctrine, the defensive limitations, and follow those consequences honestly through their tactical, operational, strategic, and global implications. The conclusion is not a comfortable one for anyone invested in the current architecture of American and Israeli security in the Middle East. Iran has built a ballistic missile capability that can conduct coordinated precision strikes against hardened military targets at ranges covering the entire Middle East. 300. Sejjil-2 missiles launched in coordinated waves from dispersed mobile platforms can saturate the layered air defense, protecting the most important military headquarters in the region, and deliver sufficient warhead impacts to destroy the facility. That capability exists. It is deployed. And the doctrine for employing it has been developed, refined, and exercised. The appropriate response to that reality by policymakers, by military planners, by the publics of the countries most directly affected begins with an accurate understanding of what the threat actually is. Not the sanitized, institutionally acceptable version that appears in official assessments designed to avoid causing panic. The real version. The version that follows from the technical specifications of the weapon and the documented limitations of the defense. That is what the Jiang report provides. If this analysis serves your understanding, subscribe, share this video. Engage in the comments with your own assessment. The conversation this community generates is one of the most analytically serious on this platform, and it continues after every video in the comment section. I am Professor Yang Shueqin. This is the Jiang report. We will be back.